Danny Flex, and delighted to be joined for Seconds Out by Lou DiBella for the latest edition of DiBella's Digest. By my shoddy mathematics, we are now on number 17 in the lockdown that never quite ends. And Lou, how's your week been?
My week's okay. You know, it's been fine. You know, a little blackout. You know, little lack of phone service. Found out today that a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, passed away. The great writer Pete Hamill. So condolences to his family. But really, he was a huge influence on me, and somebody that was really one of the more knowledgeable, amazingly interesting people I've ever met in my life. Very much a voice of New York, irreplaceable voice of New York. And I found out he passed away today. So a little bit sad over that. He had an amazing, amazing life. But anytime you lose a giant like that, he's gone too soon.
Yeah, I saw your tweet about that earlier. My condolences, obviously, to you and to his family. But how did you guys meet, and what was your relationship like? He
wrote a book that I would recommend to anybody. And by the way, like particularly anybody in the UK, because you guys like your drink. He wrote a book.
Right.
He wrote an autobiography called A Drinking Life, which is one of the great books I've ever read. An amazing author. His fiction stuff was amazing. A Drinking Life is literally, if I have 3 favorite books, it's on that list. I had a mentor named Jack Newfield, who was a journalist in New York, who was really very important to my life. And Jack and Pete were very close friends. So Jack sort of got me into Pete's circle a little bit, and we had a lot of interesting dinners and lunches over the years, and always found him a fascinating guy. He also went to my high school, Regis High School, which incidentally is the same high school that Anthony Fauci graduated from.
Okay.
But Pete never got through. Pete dropped out. And I'll never forget, it was 2010. And I had known Pete at that point for 20 years. And he knew that he was a hero of mine. And he knew that I got a big kick out of the fact that he didn't finish Regis High School, which was my high school. So around 2010, I get a phone call from Pete, and he goes, "What are you doing whatever day?" And I said, "I don't have any plans." He said, "Well, I'm graduating from Regis. They're having a special event for me. They're giving me my honorary degree from Regis High School." And I went, and there were all sorts of literary giants in the room, like, you know, famous people left and right that came because it actually meant a lot to Pete to get that degree, because he was always proud of going to Regis, though he never graduated. But now, in 2010, he got that honorary degree, and he graduated from Regis High School. But, you know, I had a lot of, I was lucky the networking I was able to do when I was a young guy. Like, I got taken under the wing of some giants like Jack Newfield and Pete Hamill. And, I remember having, dinner at Bella's Italian restaurant on Houston Street with Mario Cuomo, the late Governor Mario Cuomo, who was a political giant, Jack Newfield, Jimmy Breslin, Pete Hamill, some amazing, amazing nights that were fascinating, and just being able just to be a fly on the wall and listen to the stories that these guys had to tell. Pete Hamill and Newfield and Jimmy Breslin, they were voices of New York City. They were the voice of New York City when I was growing up. I mean, Pete was a huge newspaper man, a newspaper writer, editor, but a tremendously talented author. He dated Shirley MacLaine. He hung out with the Rat Pack. He was friends with Sinatra. He wrote the book Why Sinatra Matters. Pete lived an incredible life, a really, really rich life, and it was a privilege to know him. So, you know, today I'm celebrating his life more than I'm mourning his death. Though it's a tremendous loss, but he had such a remarkable life and such a remarkable body of work. And I'm going to recommend to everybody listening to this, A Drinking Life by Pete Hamill.
We'll put a link into it in the description as well, so people can get it on wherever it is, Amazon and stuff.
Yeah, great book.
There's no easy segue from that to what's been going on in the boxing world at the moment, so I won't even try. But how aware are you over in the US of what's been going down, particularly with Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren in the early part of this week?
Well, I saw something where Frank put something out there about trying to create matches between Matchroom and I actually thought it was sort of interesting, actually. I mean, I would guess that might have some interest over there, and I would even find it somewhat compelling. There were some good matchups there. You know, and I know that I didn't see the whole show. I didn't watch the show live last weekend, Eddie's show, but I did watch the Cheeseman Eggington fight.
Yeah,
and it was a good scrap. I mean, it was a fun scrap. I enjoyed watching it.
What did you make of the venue and the concept and the atmosphere, or lack of atmosphere, you might say, with no crowd, the setting? What did you make of all that?
I mean, it looked pretty good. I mean, it lacked a certain energy, but that's not their fault. I mean, you're still fighting with no crowd. You know, look, it was an effort to do something different and flashy, and it was, you know, Eddie being Eddie, the showman, and I'm never going to fault him for that. You know, I'm not going to take a dig for that. I thought it certainly was a beautiful setting, and but you know what, boxing without the crowd, it's like every other sport without the crowd. It's just missing something, and it's nobody's fault. I don't think anybody can wait until we can get back into having normal live audiences, because I think the fighters feed on that, and the crowd feeds on that, the viewer feeds on that. You know, I've always said in the past that when you're watching a show, when we were able to have crowds, and you were watching a show and there was no audience, like they didn't sell tickets, it didn't make for good television.
Sure.
And I think now by you know, it's nobody's fault, and it's not a matter of not being able to sell the tickets. It's you can't do live audiences. I mean, I think I very strongly noticed the lack of the live audience when I watched, but that's been the case with every boxing match I've seen during this pandemic.
So to kind of recap the Warren Hearn story, if you like. So Frank Warren's team, or he, put out an open letter to Matchroom Boxing yesterday, listing a number of fights they would like to make between the two promotional stables, and saying there's ways it could be worked out. Maybe some fights could go on BT Sports, some fights go on Sky Sports. I think he said an equitable distribution of fights. Obviously, detail would need to be ironed out on that. But it just seemed generally quite positive, maybe even refreshing, at least early on. And then Eddie crafted a response on video earlier today, basically quite condescending in tone, I think it's fair to say. Just kind of... Eddie's
good. Hold on. Eddie's good at that.
Yeah.
Eddie's good. Eddie's very good at condescending in tone. It's one of his great skills. Look, he is in British boxing now more the 800-pound gorilla than Frank is.
Sure.
But Frank does have quite a good stable. I mean, he has a lot of young talent, and he has some talent that matches up with Eddie's talent. And right now we are in a world where travel is not so easy, particularly international travel. And domestic matchups are at a premium right now. So I don't think that there was any reason that Eddie had to sort of slap Frank down. I think Frank's a good promoter. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame promoter. And you know, whatever you think of Frank's got a lot of panache, you know, and you know, I think that there's some stuff that Eddie and Frank can do together to elevate British boxing. And, you know, look, I would expect Eddie to take a shot here and there because he is the bigger player in that pond. But you know what? You know what? Everybody gets humbled a little bit. And I think that Eddie learned that the United States wasn't that easy a territory to take over. But he is in an advantaged situation in the UK. I think right now he has the biggest TV deal and the biggest stable of fighters. And his resources are greater at the moment than Frank's. But I think Frank did the right thing by taking that kind of initiative, you know, put something on the table that's interesting. I'm curious to see how the fans would react, because I would think the fans would want the biggest and best fights and care less about fanboying to a promoter, you know?
You would hope that would be the case. There seems to be a certain section of fans in the UK who do get behind specific promoters in a way that we never saw 10 years ago. which is
Well,
mainly on social media.
Look, Eddie's a good-looking dude. He's he is a good-looking guy. He's well-spoken. He's got a good sense of humor, even though sometimes I want to slap him. But he's got a good sense of humor. He's got a gift of gab. I mean, he's a very talented person from that P.T. Barnum kind of carnival barker promotional end. He's not without skill, and he's also a little bit of a bad winner. He's a little bit of a bully, and I think all that stuff comes across. Eddie likes being the center of attention. In the United States, promoters can't really do that. Like, no one gives a shit here. Like, I mean, honestly, like, yes, you'll see Top Rank has its loyalists. Al Heyman and PBC have their loyalists. But for the most part, people want to see good fights here. I mean, Al Heyman, there's barely a picture of Al Heyman on the internet. He's been the most powerful man in American boxing for a while, for a long time. And you can't even find a picture of him. Al never does an interview. He's never never doing a podcast. You can't find a print interview with him. He's very much, from a PR standpoint, a ghost. So he like, our orientation over here on this side of the pond isn't as promoter centric as it is in the UK. I mean, I remember years ago when I first got into boxing in the 90s. Well, I first got into boxing in 1989, but I remember in the 90s, Don King, over a glass of scotch, telling me at the bar of the Carlisle Hotel, Don looked me in the eye and he said, "Lou, I'm a bigger star than any of my motherfucking fighters." And he goes, and I'm going to be around long after they are. And he believed that. And he was a star. I mean, he was a celebrity. I think Eddie has that mentality a little bit that Don had back then, that Eddie's a star. And by the way, it appears that in the UK, he is.
He is. When you're at press conferences, weigh-ins and events on Fight Week, the queues of journalists to speak to Eddie Hearn are generally longer than the boxers, unless it's an AJ or a Dillian White.
I mean, I guess that works in your market. That wouldn't work here. I mean, Oscar De La Hoya was a gigantic star as a fighter, one of the greatest fighters I ever saw. And right now, no one gives a fuck whether or not he's promoting a particular fighter. They just don't care. I mean, Eddie thought that he was going to translate to his star power would translate to America, and that, Black American fighters and other American fighters would gravitate toward him in the zone because they had deep pockets. But it's still a relationship business, and it's still, I just think we're in a different market. I think that Eddie Hearn is able to be Eddie Hearn in the UK, and in the UK, Eddie Hearn's a celebrity.
So let's look at the US in this kind of arena. Say tomorrow, PBC put out an open letter to the media addressed to Bob Arum at Top Rank, similarly with a list of fights, different divisions where they could match their stars against Top Rank stars, equitable distribution in theory across the two broadcasters, or three broadcasters, I guess, with Fox and Showtime affiliated with PBC. What would the reaction be in the US, do you think? Would it be largely skeptical, or would it be welcomed?
Well, I think if PBC issued a statement, people would be so amazed, that the PBC is not big on issuing statements. But I don't think people would be so skeptical. I think if it made economic sense, you'd probably see some events come out of it. It's hard because their platforms are in direct competition here. And none of them are thriving at the moment. They're all having their own struggles. That doesn't mean, I'm not being pessimistic or believing that we're not going to get out of those struggles, but no one's fooling anybody to say these are trying times for sports in general. These are trying times for boxing in America. But I think that there would be a receptivity to it. I think that people want to see the biggest and best fights. And, some of those fights that Frank suggested, I'd find compelling, and they're still Brit on Brit fights, but I would find them compelling. No, I think that if that kind of initiative or that kind of a reach out was made here, I think it would resonate.
Now, you mentioned Oscar De La Hoya earlier. There's rumours circulating at the moment that Canelo will now not be fighting in September, and that will actually be delayed because no one suitable could be found to oppose him with the time left. I don't know how true that is at this stage, although, it's not too far
Well,
off that date.
Clearly, he's not going to fight in September. I mean, I think that's clear. Was there anyone for him to fight? Yeah, if you wanted to pay the money to make the deal, and you wanted to pay Canelo what he wanted to fight those particular fighters, there probably was a fight to be made. I know that Eddie has a show in Tulsa on August 15th, and I think Golden Boy has a show late in August. And then Eddie has that show with Dillian White that's going to be on DAZN. But at the moment, I don't think there's any DAZN U.S.-based programming scheduled beyond August. So, I believe Canelo will fight before year end. But at the moment, they're probably trying to figure out how to do it and who to fight and all the details. And I don't think they're feeling compelled by a September date, particularly when the U.S. is in the mess it's in right now with the coronavirus.
In the current economic climate, how much of a blow is it for DAZN specifically that their biggest star is now not going to be out in September?
I don't know, because I don't know. It may be an advantage to DAZN that they're creating more of a war chest and saving some money before they jump back in. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, people are making decisions that they think are in their best business interest. It was Aaron believed it was in his best business interest to be the first back in U.S. boxing. Showtime and PBC, DAZN have been more conservative about it. And DAZN really sort of put some toes in the water, but hasn't jumped in full scale right now. So I don't know. I mean, it may actually be that they feel it's in their advantage to regroup and further hone their strategy before they jump in full scale.
And before we let you go, we found out today that the temporary suspension of Jarrell Miller by the Nevada State Athletic Commission has been extended. Right decision, do you feel?
Yeah, it needed to be extended. Yes. I think at some point they're going to have to clarify what the suspension will be. The suspension has to take effect and be effect across the country. So it's a national suspension, not one where he can pick and choose where he could fight. But I would have expected them to continue the suspension. And I'm still hoping that Jarrell can pull things back together in his life and his career. Great
stuff. Well, I hope next week brings at least your power back, if nothing else. They say the last thing you lose in boxing is your power, but they've obviously never been to Long Island in a storm,
No, they've never been to Nassau County. So Topolino's going crazy in the background. I'm going to jump off. Good talking to you, Danny.
And you, Lou. See you next week. Take care.
Take care.